In this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, we are going to talk to civil engineer Pavitra Rammohan about renewable energy and decoupling the water energy nexus. Really interesting stuff. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'm excited to welcome today's guest onto the Civil Engineering Podcast, Pavitra Rammohan. Pavitra is a regional manager at Deeproot, located in Los Angeles. Pavitra, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Oh, great. Hi, Anthony. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Just to introduce myself, I'm Pavitra, Region Manager, SoCal for Deeproot. We're a global water technology leader specializing in building sustainable urban spaces, including both promoting healthy tree growth and also efficient stormwater management. Our flagship technology called Silva cells is a modular suspended pavement system. So I'm really excited to join you all today to share my experiences.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to be speaking with you, Pavitra, for a lot of reasons. We're going to dig into a lot of stuff here. But first, before we kind of dig into some of the things you're doing at work, I want to talk a little bit about you, personally, your journey. You came here to the U.S. from India, and I know you're passionate about what you do in water resources, and I know it's partially because of where you came from. So talk to us about that a little bit.
Oh, sure. Great. Thank you for digging it up. Yes, I'm from India, southern part of India, a city called Chennai. And if you're watching some of the latest news, it's one of the regions that's facing high levels of water stress. So coming from that area, clearly water is a very sensitive topic there and across the globe. There are increasing number of countries facing that levels of stress. So I clearly, as a teenager, I wanted to pursue a career in engineering, especially focus in water and environment. And at that time, A&M came highly recommended to me with the opportunities available there, both at TTI, which is Texas Transportation Institute, and I had the opportunity to work on projects that are like real time, with quantitative results that could impact the type of technologies used in the stormwater space. Since then, I've developed deep expertise in engineering consulting. I work for engineering firms, including Hatch, Carollo Engineers, URS, Atkins, and I've been very fortunate to be part of teams and experiences that have just propelled me to advance, in terms of making an impact, moving the needle. And a year ago, when I joined Deeproot, for me, it was transforming from consulting to enhance consulting. So in addition to services, professional services, it was services and technology. So that enabled me to work more closely, more upstream with our clients here. That way, even while the opportunities or projects are in conceptual stage, I can work with them in terms of applications and what is the best suitable technology for their particular project or initiative. So I'm really excited to be part of the Deeproot team and our mission to build sustainable urban spaces.
Wow, that just sounds really exciting, and I want to dig into that. But just one last question on kind of your journey here to the United States. How long ago did you come here?
I moved to the United States about 15 years ago.
Okay, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Was that like, what part of your career? Was that college or before college or?
It was my master's. It was my second master's.
Okay, your
Yeah.
second master's. So talk about that transition. I mean, at this point in time, when I speak to you, it sounds like, you've been here forever and, you're really doing a wonderful job with a lot of great work. But I'm sure just the transition from coming from one country to another in itself, as well as while you're learning all this new technical concepts, must have been challenging.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Yes, it's clearly very different. And however, the place where I'm coming from is a very diverse background. So I'm used to having interacted. I went to one of the best schools in India called BITS Pilani, and it gave me that platform where you had folks from across the globe, joining that school. So I had that experience of interacting with fellow classmates who are from other parts of the country. And within India, there are so many different regions and it's so diverse. The way aspects, basic resources such as water and energy are dealt with are different. So it gave me that good start. So when I moved to United States, clearly, those experiences in terms of not just diversity, but also in terms of how business is done.
Right.
If you're thinking of a P3 type arrangement here to design and build projects, public-private partnership, how do you bring the investors to the table? How do you quantify the benefits? How do you then, develop the streamlined framework of how the costs are being split? So there's a lot of comparisons, or key insights that I could draw from how things are done back home. And even during the engineering program, we have internships, or we call it the practice school, where you're actually part of the industry there and you see how it is done. So as part of that, I was part of Neyveli Lignite Corporation. It's the largest coal producer, in India. So it's key to draw those comparisons and be able to add that value, in addition to the other key things such as diversity and um, you know contrast, comparison, and contrast. Yeah.
That's great. All right. So all that being said, let's dig into, some technical topics, some of the things you're working on, which are really interesting. I know that you're passionate about the need that we have for transformed infrastructure. It's a big thing. And when you and I talked before the interview, you talked a little bit about this idea of decoupling the water and the energy nexus, which I found to be really interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit for our listeners?
Sure. So by that very term, it's one of those buzzwords that everyone uses. Basically, we are talking about the basic interdependency between the water and the energy resources. So clearly there is nexus, and then it's high time we start talking about decoupling that nexus. And the approach is not even one of those, hey, it's optional, good to have, but it's more like, the way I view it, it is a strategic imperative. Because as I said, increasing number of countries facing this higher levels of water stress. So it's really important that you decouple it, else the way you produce energy, that is going to suffer. Say you have a desal plant, and if that's your go-to move to produce water, you're using up a lot of energy to create that. And on the other hand, you have this power plant that you're trying to have cooling towers and whatnot, that you're trying to keep it cool and running. You're using water for that. So it's not sustainable. So it's not even an optional approach, but I think it's in our benefit. It's a global priority that we look into efforts to decouple the water energy nexus. And the good news is there is already technology in place. And that's where, where you have, other sources. There are other sources of renewable energy in addition to the solar and wind that we hear a lot about. There are mechanisms such as renewable natural gas, where basically you go to, wet organic material, right, waste material, and convert them into methane gas and basically use that as an RNG. So there are ways you can do it, and that's where aspects, you got to look beyond economics and enforcement. I think the stage where we are right now, it's about consistency and transparency. What is the source of that energy? What kind of credit can be obtained? A renewable energy certificates. They are trying out some pilot mechanisms in Minnesota, where they're looking at, if you're a manufacturer of renewable energy gas, there is a way you can trade that. You can gain certificates, and investors can buy into it. So there are ways you can apply those to achieve consistency and transparency. So I think that's critical to decouple it.
So in terms of renewable energy, that's also kind of one of these words you hear thrown around a lot, or phrase you hear used a lot. But I think, sometimes some people may not understand what that means. So can you explain, what is renewable energy? What would be an example, or what would that mean?
Okay, so if you're looking at renewable energy, there are the three. If you look at the biggest sources of renewable energy is your solar, wind. You hear about hydropower, and the biggest challenge, people who say, hey, you cannot go 100% renewable, and there is going to be always this reliance on fossil fuels, is because these biggest sources of renewable energies are not dispatchable. And what we mean by not dispatchable is it's not an on and off thing. It's not something you can just, it cannot be made up and down, at a
Right.
short notice. Your grid does not adjust, right, to this. You cannot, you have to work on the supply and the demand. So that's the key aspect, where they're like, okay, then you're going to need some kind of storage device, right, like an advanced battery or other energy storage technologies that you can use in order to handle peak situation, peak circumstances. And that's where, you got to be creative about it, because they're saying that in order for us to go 100% renewable energy, you got to be like, the price got to drop like 90% from what it is today to like $20 kilowatt hour. Now it's like a $200. So that's a drastic thing, right? But that's where I think it takes for professionals like us to get creative about it, in the sense, maybe the, as they call the EAF, the equivalent availability factor, which is now at 100%. Like, we are in developed countries, right, where you always match supply with demand. Maybe if it can be reduced to 95%, then maybe, doing that could help reduce. Maybe it's not $200 kilowatt hour, maybe it's $150 kilo, but there is a little bit of compromise.
I see.
Maybe doing that in a phase stage, so you build that momentum, towards having these renewable energy sources coupled with energy storage that is sustainable price wise. It's economically viable. If not, if you're just shooting for the target of, oh, we got to reduce 90% from the cost it is now, it's a huge target. So that's one of the ways to get creative about it, and be able to accomplish that goal by 2030.
That's great. And and I'm kind of learning too as we go here in this conversation. So thanks for explaining everything. And so basically what it sounds like is, we're going to have to decouple, water and energy. It's not going to last forever if we keep using them at the same time. One needs the other. And one way to do that is the renewable energy sources. However, with renewable energy sources, we just need to be smart about downtime that might be caused because we can't necessarily control those sources of energy. And we need to recreate systems that can help us to do that. Is that accurate?
Yes, energy storage system to balance the fluctuations, that occur in the supply demand, and also work on the demand side management, which is, shifting around the energy consumption. So that's another aspect of it. And there is also, the long distance transmission. Sometimes, say in Texas, you can do all these renewable energy production, using really high transmission systems. So there are multiple ways. Again, there is a cost benefit. You have to have alternatives, compare cost comparisons, environmental impact comparisons, and go about it.
Great. So now I know, there's all kinds of technical aspects to this that you get involved with in terms of water resources and all that stuff that's very important from a civil engineering perspective. But I also know when it comes to these types of, you can almost call them movements, that you need to build a support network. You need to grow advocates to kind of move these causes forward. It's something that, not all civil engineers deal with and understand because they may not have to deal with that in their specific technical expertise. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of kind of in what you do, getting stakeholders in addition to just having to worry about the technical side of things?
That's a great question. And I think that's where our generation, the millennial generation, have stepped up, as a generation of engineers have stepped up. And this is not to, say anything low about the previous generation of engineers, but it's just that our generation, it's part of our profile, or it's part of, of who we are, in terms of, giving it the voice, being able to, describe, the pros and cons of the decisions we make, be technical decisions or bringing people to the table, and building that support network. So I think I want to give kudos, to my entire generation of engineers. And again, it's going back to, is it something good to do? It's no longer that. I think it's important for engineers, to be part of the conversation. That way, the technical aspects are communicated, and that's where, building your communication skills and working with your teams more closely, teams both inside your firm and outside, and building that advocacy group and buy in to these initiatives, because ideas, there could be great ideas, but without support and without the trust among the network, it's not going far. So I think it's part of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think one of the really great things about the profession of being a civil engineer is that you, of course, have the ability to make, monumental impacts on the world we live in, because of all the different topics in terms of water resources and climate change and all these, and infrastructure and all these critical items that we work on. However, to your point, and I'm glad you kind of brought this up, is just because we know how to design them doesn't mean that they're going to happen, right? A large part of that, and we've had people talk about this before on the podcast, is the advocacy of getting out there and speaking to, people in Congress, representatives, about getting funding for these types of projects. And so I think it's a really important thing for civil engineers to think about, because I know a lot of civil engineers become civil engineers because they want to change the world. And just doing the calculations is not necessarily enough to do that. It's the communication.
And the good news is people listen.
Yeah, that is good news.
Yes, especially if they know that, you're technically sound and you've been part of it and you're passionate about it, and you have your objective about the decision. Passion is one thing. In addition to that, being able to back up, what you're trying to share. People listen and they want to listen, and the outcome could be yay or nay. It depends on the project and the opportunity, but getting the word out, getting in front of them is so critical to move the needle.
Now, Pavitra, you're a young civil engineer, but you seem extremely confident in what you do. Is that just from experience? How did you develop such a confidence? And you seem very comfortable speaking about everything you work on.
Oh, thank you. I take that as a compliment. Thank you so much. As I said, I think it's the journey and the people and the experiences we come across, that becomes our fabric, right? Becomes part of our fabric. And then that's where I've had the opportunity to work with really highly accomplished people, in their own ways of life. They're an engineer or a doctor or whatever they're doing, or an artist. So I've had the opportunity to work with highly creative people, and I must say it's like reflecting, goodness and support, where I've been part of these great teams. And again, it's quick wins, as you start moving out, start your career, and then you start building these quick wins, and there's momentum that's growing. And then as you progress through the journey, you become more confident. There are lessons learned, and those are critical as well, as important as successes, and you learn through that and build friendships, and it comes just like that.
That's great. Yeah, it's the experience and all the people you've met, for sure, that are certainly have had a great impact on you.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Pavitra, this is part of our Women in Civil Engineering series. And here in the United States, there are a lot more men in engineering. However, we've seen some changes in that, and we're starting to see more women get involved, which is exciting. I'm just wondering if it's like that in India, or how it was when you were there. Is it similar, or?
So that's the good news, right? So in India, if you're looking at the engineering field aspect of it, right? Yes, you have more men, enroll and take up civil engineering as their profession. But if you look at college admissions, especially top-notch colleges, IIT or BITS Pilani, clearly it's more women who are enrolled at those universities. But here is the catch: the biggest and the first to drop, where women stray away from civil engineering and they move on to software or other things, happens after graduation. So that's one of the areas where, I'm still in touch with my professors, back home. And one thing that they're really proud of is that I remained in civil engineering, in water and environment, because that's my passion.
Right.
And it's not for everyone. You have to always follow your passion. This is what I love doing. And it's until this date, with Deeproot, through Silva cells, making a difference, to cities and communities. I think that's what drives you beyond things such as men or women or the backgrounds. I think passion trumps everything else.
Yeah, for sure. So what you mentioned, this was it the Silva cells?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Great. So Silva cells, they are a modular suspended pavement systems, which are like, just imagine any paved surfaces, like a plaza area or a parking lot or sidewalks. And these are systems, that go under these paved surfaces, and they serve as a vehicle to carry lightly compacted soils, meaning that you can still retain the functional aspects of the paved surface above, but at the same time promote an environment that can help healthy trees grow, in addition to efficient stormwater management through underground bioretention. So stormwater management is a huge item, right? It's a compliance aspect of it.
Sure.
So when you have runoff from these development or redevelopment projects, public right-of-way or private development, you have to manage this runoff. And it becomes really a challenge to have systems that are above surface, because you have to spend into operations and maintenance.
Right.
The Silva cells presents this system where you're still working with your limited area constraints that you face in urban setups. At the same time, you're doing it underground. So it's not, it's savings in surface space, that's dollar per square foot, and also minimal to no operation maintenance. And recently, Silva cells was selected by City of Glendale as the cutting edge technology 2019. So this award is as recent as last week on
Wow,
Friday.
congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
So, and my background's in stormwater. So is this a subsurface? Is it the actual pavement, or is it's something underneath the pavement?
It's underneath the pavement. So you have Silva cells, you have different depths that you can work with.
Okay.
And then you have aggregate padding both below and above the Silva cells. And then on top of that is your paving. And the beauty of this system is Silva cells can work with any type of paving. So you can have concrete, you can have permeable pavers, you can have impermeable pavers. So there are multiple options you can work with. And you can retain runoff, you can store them, you can infiltrate the runoff, you can use it as a biofiltration system, which means like a flow-through system. So it provides a flexibility where you don't have to tweak your design. Silva cells can fit in within your design, depending on whatever the objective is for the project.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. And we'll make sure to get some information from Pavitra that we can link to in the episode show notes here. All right, Pavitra, you've said a lot already, but I'd like you to just stick around for a few more questions, and we're going to put you on our civil engineering hot seat and ask you a couple career questions. Is that all right?
Oh, yeah. Great.
All right, great. We'll be right back with that.
I hope you are enjoying this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, which is produced by the Engineering Management Institute. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for more podcast episodes and for all of our Engineering Manager 80/20 Shorts videos that we publish weekly, where we interview successful engineering managers. Now it's time to jump into our Civil Engineering Hot Seat segment.
All right, I'm back with Pavitra Rammohan from Deeproot. We've been kind of digging into a whole bunch of interesting topics here, but now, Pavitra, we're going to focus on a couple of career development questions on our civil engineering hot seat. So my first question for you is, do you have any type of rituals or routines that you practice on a daily basis, whether it's every morning or at lunchtime, or something that you do consistently that helps you to be successful?
That's it's an interesting question because there are several things that come to mind, but I'm just going to list a couple, which I've found to be very useful. So the first thing is, I know you asked this question specific to engineering, but this particular thing has helped me. You do engineering or planning, or it's just a useful trait. Is regular check-ins. I regularly check in with my team throughout the day periodically. So it's not at 8 o'clock every day or 12 o'clock, but throughout the day at least 3 times I check in with my teams, both locally and also ones who work remotely. And what it helps to do is it kind of streamlines your plan of work for the day, and more importantly it helps you prioritize. And that's where some things that you could learn from your team in terms of ideas, or in terms of planning things ahead. I have folks who are assisting me on projects or other opportunities. So the check-ins always help in terms of staying at the present moment.
Right.
Because for that day, that particular thing, what is the priority, or as a team are we looking forward and moving that. And I understand how this is not really specific to engineering, but I think if you've gone through the program and developed these engineering skills, I think it's the communications and collaboration and doing it periodically and throughout the day kind of helps, keeps the focus, not just for yourself, but for your entire team.
No, that's great. And really the question was any routines, even if it was, taking a walk or exercise or anything, but I'm glad you said check-ins, because I think that is important. All right, next question. What is one book that you have found to be extremely helpful for you in your personal or professional development? It doesn't have to be engineering related. Is there anyone that sticks out for you, a book that you might have read if you have one?
Yeah. So recently I read this book called Tribal Leadership. And this book is by author Dave Logan. And it's a book that talks about the different types of leaderships and the different types of leadership styles and management that firms use. So one of the interesting things is the book talks about it talks about how within organization you have class A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have type 4 is like the first type 1 is more like I am great, type 2 is like we are great,
Right.
and type 3 is like like a group. So being able to feel belonged, part of the team. So I think and it talks about how you grow. You have to go through step by step, because if you're in size or type 1 and you're just shooting for type 4, you miss out on the learnings if that you would get if you progress through the different types. So I think it's a neat read by Dave Logan.
That's great. That's awesome. All right, next question. You've had, I'm sure, several managers in your career so far as you've been with different companies. And I'm just wondering if you think back on the managers you've had, and you don't have to, of course, name names, but some of your favorite managers, what made them your favorite?
So one thing is, again, this question, depending on whom you ask, it's a match of two personalities, right? And for me, I tend to be more entrepreneurial, highly driven, and I like to get out there, take the initiative, and do. So for me, one of the key traits of my present pharma managers that have really worked is allowing me that space to be able to grow, to be creative, to go take a shot at it. So providing that space and having, them having the trust on me is a huge thing for me, because, that's what propels you to the next level, to advance. So that I would say, trust and giving the space.
That's great. Awesome. All right, one final question for you, Pavitra, which we call the civil engineering career elevator advice question. If you got into an elevator with a civil engineer for 30, 40 seconds and you had to give him or her career advice based on your experience to date, what would it be?
Be authentic. Yes. That's, it completely stands out. And regardless of your background, your learning experience, I think being authentic and presenting your story, tell your story. And, you have to be both objective about it and passionate, both at the same time. And being able to share your journey will help make a true impact.
That's great. I think you kind of just summed up who you are in that last couple of sentences, which is, I mean, you're a very, you have a high level of expertise technically, which we know from your experience and all of this work you've done in stormwater, but it's obvious also that you're a leader in the field. You're passionate about, big problems in the world that you want to help to, solve. And a lot of them you're familiar with because of where you came from, which is your own story, right? Which is kind of why I think you can tell through every minute of this interview that you're very, very passionate about what you do. And those are really, I think, the civil engineers like you are the civil engineers that are going to kind of lead us into the future. So thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy schedule and coming on the Civil Engineering Podcast. I'm excited to kind of watch what you do, and I hope that you'll keep in touch with us here at EMI.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for your time. Nice meeting you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast on YouTube, produced by the Engineering Management Institute. We're always looking for new ways to help engineers become effective managers and leaders. You can view all of our content on our website at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for our weekly videos. Until next time, please continue to engineer your own success.